Morning sports fans, science fans, absurdity loving fans and non-absurdity loving fans. Everyone across the board. As a parent, my job is to protect my children. Full stop. Right? What I do, all of this could be confused for me just going, meh. This is me protecting my children from what I see as obvious lies. Okay? That is what all this is about. It's because of the obvious lies, and it's because of this one sentence that keeps coming up, right? Prove they didn't. Prove they didn't go to the moon. Prove they didn't build the pyramids. Prove that he didn't look up at Jupiter in 1616 and work out the speed of light. That is what, 1676, sorry. That is what all of this is about. For all of you people that keep saying, prove it didn't happen, right? It's not your fault that you're saying this. Somehow, somewhere down the line, they've used you as a weapon. Because when people like us, right, where we're accused of being conspiracy theorists, when we say, no, listen, it's not, you are programmed now. You're like a barrier in between them and us. You are the barrier because you're programmed to go, no, prove they didn't. That is not how things should be. There is a step before that. I'm going to explain it right now, okay? Let's go back to the very, very beginning. A lot of what goes on, right? Where's the white one? A lot of what is going on. I could say we could go back a couple of thousand years, but we don't really need to go back. Well, let's not go there. Let's go back to Kepler. And old Roma. Right? Now Kepler, he's the chappie who worked out the gravitational pulls of planets, the orbits, the way planets move, where they go, where they've been, where they're going to be in 20 years' time, right? Old Roma, he was the person who discovered the speed of light using nothing more than a telescope, and by viewing the moon of Jupiter, Io, as it kept creeping around Jupiter every 42 hours. Alexa, how long does it take for the moon Io to orbit Jupiter?
From techtimes.com, the new moons take 340 Earth days to orbit Jupiter.
Alexa, how long does it take Io to orbit Jupiter?
It takes 1 day, 18 hours, and 27 minutes for Io to orbit Jupiter.
Alexa, how long does it take Jupiter's moon Io to orbit Jupiter?
It takes 1 day, 18 hours, and 27 minutes for Io to orbit Jupiter.
Okay, all right, I thought she was doing that. It takes 1 day and 18 hours. 24 hours, 1 day, 18 hours is. Takes nearly 2 days for Io to orbit Jupiter. It takes 12 years for Jupiter orbit the Sun. It's 42 hours, right, for Io to orbit Jupiter, and it takes Jupiter 12 years to orbit the Sun. All right? Right there, straight away, you have yourselves a massive time structure going on to do what it is claimed that he did in 1676. Now, everybody that says, prove that he didn't do it, prove that he didn't do it, right? Kepler, 1618. Oh, Roma, 1676. This is give or take a year or two. It doesn't really matter. Didn't happen. Number one, the first thing before people start saying, prove that they didn't do it, there's two questions, right? Two questions with everything, all these claims that are being made. There's two questions that need to be asked. In 1618, why on earth would old Kepi get up in the morning and go, hey, I am going to work out the gravitational pull and the direction that planets are going, where they're going to be in 20 years, 10 years, 2 years, right? Why would he do that? What makes somebody want to do that? He's like one of the first to embark on this bizarre mission of finding out something that had absolutely nothing to do with the time, with the era that we're talking about, the 1600s. So why? People say, well, it doesn't really matter. Well, it kind of does matter, because this is the beginning of an absurdity, right? It does matter. Why? Why would somebody in 1618, right, 400 years or 350 years at the time, 350 years before moon travel was even a thing? Why? Right? Come up with some Mickey Mouse answer. That's fine, if you want to play that game. Why? And how? How does somebody in 1618 work out the orbit of Mars around the Sun? How does somebody work out the orbit of Mars around the Sun in relation to us in 1618? It cannot be done, right? And anybody who says that it can be done, this is where you need to be saying, prove that they did it, right? You need to ask why they would do it. And if you do get past the why, with some kind of logical reason, how did they do it? How on earth would somebody work out yellow is always the Sun, red is always Mars, and blue is always us? How on earth in 1616, right, would somebody here, right, work out the orbit of something here around the Sun? How? (1616). How would somebody on here work out where Mars was going to be this time next year? How? There is no logical answer. I mean, what are we talking here, right? Do not ask us to prove how something that could not be done, right? Don't ask us to prove that it didn't happen. It didn't happen because it is physically impossible. What you need to do is step back to the line where we are at and ask the people that are telling you that these things happened, you ask them, why did he decide to do this? And exactly how did he do it, okay? Kepler, it was his discoveries, right? When we say everything is connected, this is what we mean, right? Kepler, his discovery of the motion of the planets and the orbits that they take around the sun and around us, everything in relation to each other. Do you know what his discovery made, what was possible because of his discovery, right? Now this is where things are at again. I always say this, right? Here we are. Somewhere here, for example. Alexa, how far away did DART have to travel to knock the asteroid off of course? I've forgotten the name of the asteroid.
From explorersweb.com. The DART spacecraft will travel to the target asteroid over 10 million kilometers away from Earth.
$10 million kilometers. It's launched a rocket and it hits an asteroid that was travelling. Look, right? They actually took photos of it. Listen, it was Kepler's discovery about how the planets. Alexa, exactly how did Kepler work out the orbits of planets back in 1616?
From gizmodo.com. In attempting to understand the movement of the planets, Kepler looked to Platonic solids, coming up with a way to describe the orbits of the planets by nesting three-dimensional polyhedra inside one another.
Polyhedra, how many sides is a polyhedra? Not going to bother. Why would I go there? Why would I go there understanding that it's bollocks? All right? He would have been playing soccer or chasing girls. Kepler probably didn't exist. Right? Oh, Roma? Claims, old Roma worked out that the speed of light is 299,793 kilometers per second, right? And he did this by using a telescope, right? On a planet. Here we are. Here's Jupiter. There's the sun. Right. Distances, it doesn't really matter. Jupiter has a moon. Look, we're going to give it blue. So Jupiter has a moon. When it came into sight, right? When Earth was closest to Jupiter, right? Doesn't matter about the scale. He looked with a telescope, right? And he saw Io coming from behind Jupiter, right? I've actually seen one article where it said he actually saw it as it disappeared. Listen, it doesn't really matter which one it is, because again, it's bollocks, right? He's looking with a telescope, he sees Io, right, coming from behind Jupiter, and with his clock stopwatch, sorry, no electricity, nothing like that, right? I think they might have had some kind of stopwatch. He sees the moon coming from behind Jupiter, goes, right, I'm going to record the distance. Observation 1. 6 months later, when Earth was at its furthest from Jupiter, and Jupiter moves anti-clockwise as well, right? Jupiter would have moved 1/24th of its orbit around the Sun. 1/24th, right? Because it takes 12 years for Jupiter to orbit the Sun, right? So 6 months later, that is only half of 1. So instead of 1/12th, it's 1/24th. So Jupiter was more or less in the same spot, right? It would be here. Because 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, it would have taken 24 of our halves. So he's here, right? And he's got the sun there, and just as he's here, gets his little telescope out again, right? And takes another peek as Io is coming around out of Jupiter's, coming from behind Jupiter again. It is said that between the sighting of the first one and the second one, right, the difference between these two sightings, there was something like a 20 or 22 minute difference, right? The reason for this difference, what they're saying, is because the 150 million kilometers between the sun and the Earth when he was here, it comes to the other side of the sun, it's another 150 million, it's our orbit, right? That 300 million kilometers is the reason they're giving for the difference. And they're blaming on the light. That's 300 million. Alexa, what's 300 million divided by 299,792?
300 million divided by 299,792 is approximately 1,000.6938.
1,000. So this will be seconds, right? So if we divide this by 60, so get rid of that 0, get rid of that 0, right? 60 is 10, go 1, we've got 4 left over, 16, 6 into 40, goes 6 times, and that's 36, and we've got 4 left over. Now that would only be 16 minutes, right? But the fact is, when he looked at Io coming from behind Jupiter, on the first session, he was using a telescope. He was using a telescope. When he took the second viewing 6 months later, he was using a telescope. He was using a telescope, right? Now, if he used a telescope on both of those viewings, right? It's rubbish. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. The whole thing is just an elaborate story, right? That it's so difficult to work out that people can just go, prove it didn't happen. It didn't happen. I doubt that old Roma existed in the first place, okay? So, we've got somebody who's taking, there's a planet here, there's a planet there, we've got a sun in the middle, right? And there's a planet over here, right, with a moon, let's just say it's disappearing because of that angle there, right? No, we can make it. Got a moon that's appearing here, right? Now what difference would there be if the guy here, right, is looking through a telescope, right, and it's the other way around, actually, he'd be looking at the furthest one, wouldn't he, right? Guy's looking at this moon through a telescope. And then down here, another guy. This is live now. This is not a 6-month delay that they're claiming didn't happen, right? Both of these two people at the exact same time. There's two planets orbiting the sun, two Earths. Let's play the different dimension thing that they keep saying. You know, why not? Why would there be any light difference whatsoever if both of these people are looking through a telescope? The reason they're giving this, that there was a 20 to 22 minute, right? A 20 to 22 minute delay in Io appearing from behind Jupiter when he took the second reading. This is position 2, this is position 1. Position 1 when we were our closest to Jupiter, and position 2 when we were our furthest from Jupiter. The distance in between the 150 million here and 150 million on this side is the 300 million kilometers that they are saying was how he measured the speed of light, because there was a difference. It only comes up to 14 minutes something anyway, that 300 million. But they're both looking through a telescope. Why on earth would there be a delay if they're looking through a telescope? The light is not going to have anything to do with it. See, what they're saying is it takes that long for the light to hit Io and Jupiter and then bounce back to this guy. And what they're saying is, here, it takes light, and boom, from the sun, and to then bounce back. It's ridiculous, right? When we look up at Saturn in the night sky, it's the furthest planet we can see with the naked eye. There is no time difference. If I was looking up with the naked eye and somebody next to me was looking at Saturn with a telescope, we both see the exact same thing. There is no time difference. There is no time difference. So why do they think that there would be this 20-second time difference from 1 to 2? Why would there be a time difference? Why would any light have to do with anything if they're both using a telescope? They're not waiting for the light to come back and rebound. They're catching Io there as it is, right? There is no waiting. He's catching Io as it is. There is no waiting. When we look up at Saturn, we see Saturn. There is no waiting for the sun to go all the way up to there and then bounce back. It takes 1 hour, 1 minute and 20. Well, this is Jupiter. Saturn is the furthest one away. What they're saying is when we see Saturn, what we are actually seeing, right? What we are seeing when we look up at Saturn in the night sky, we're seeing a reflection. That's us, that's the sun, that's Saturn. So you've got Mercury, Venus, us, Mars, Jupiter in between. Saturn is the furthest one away from us. They are telling us that we are seeing a reflection. This we are seeing, don't get me wrong, we are seeing Saturn because of the sun. Because otherwise we wouldn't see Saturn, because it's not a star, it's a planet, it's a lump of rock, or the gas and this, like Jupiter is a gas giant. That is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is they are telling us that we're seeing this. It takes 1 hour and 20, so they say, for the sunlight to reach Saturn, and then another hour and a bit, depending where we are in our orbit around the sun, to reach us. So technically, when we look up at Saturn, this is over 2 hours ago. right? No, it's not. It's logical. If somebody was stood right next to me with a telescope, they're not waiting for any light to reach us, for crying out loud. We are seeing Saturn exactly as it is. The sun's light is absolute, right? It's lit up. There is no delay. We know this because 4.6, another story, right? It's rubbish. So don't look at us and say, well, prove he didn't do it. He didn't do it because it can't be done. It's stupid. It's stupid. But they've programmed people to question us, right? When we say something, this is the most common thing. It happened this morning. Two different things, right? Prove that they didn't build the pyramids. Prove that they didn't build the pyramids. Mamma mia, right? Far out. Prove that they didn't drag the equivalent of 65 Nimitz class aircraft carriers through the desert. You want us to prove to you that they did not, that the Egyptians 4,500 years ago didn't drag 65 fully loaded, fully fueled up with full crew, planes, helicopters. They didn't drag it through the desert. You want us to prove that to you. You don't want them to prove that they did it, right? You don't want them to prove that they did this. You don't need any evidence. They tell you they did it, case closed. So when somebody comes across and says, yo, they did it, then you go, whoa, give me some proof, please, that they didn't. You need to be asking for proof that they did. Because one to 2 meters across, anywhere from 1 to 1.5 meters, and the width so that will be look. Right? Anywhere between 1 and 1.5 as well. Okay? So, you want us to prove that the Egyptians did not build the pyramids. You want proof that the Egyptians didn't drag 65 Nimitz class aircraft carriers through the desert, the equivalent weight of in stone. But you don't want proof of just one single one of these stones that weighs 2.5 tons, right? You don't feel that there's any need to ask these people that are making these bizarre claims about the pyramids. You don't think that they need to prove, to show you how the Egyptians dug 2.3 million of these stones out. Don't you think just one stone, right? Just ask your people how, with nothing more than copper hand tools, this is all the Egyptians had. There was no wheel, there was no iron, steel. It was copper hand tools, people. Why don't you think that it's within your rights to say, hang on, before we attack the conspiracy theorists, do you mind just showing us how they dug just one of these 2.5 ton stones out of limestone quarries using nothing but copper hand tools? If you ask your researchers and your scientists, and if you question these studies that suggest that the Egyptians built these pyramids, you will not get a logical explanation for how the stones were cut out in the first place. Do you know why? Because it could not be done. It can't be done now as much as it could be done back then. So the reason that nobody has filmed someone with copper hand tools digging away in a limestone quarry to show us how they did it back then is because it cannot be done, right? Instead, what they do, you get these little articles that come up and they say, problem solved. Now we know how the Egyptians moved the 2.5-ton stones. This was the mystery all along, wasn't it? This is the mystery. Boats. There was waterways. Problem solved. Mystery solved. So the boats, right? Little sailboats. Was waterways. That's how they transported these bloody stones, isn't it? But we need to step back again, don't we? We don't really care about the waterways because we still want to know how these 2.3 million 2.5-ton stones were carved out of limestone quarries. So before you say to us, prove that they didn't do it, right? Just use a little bit of common sense, right? Just a little bit. Just look at things in your head and go, hang on a minute, hang on. How did they dig those stones out of limestone quarries? Stop telling us to prove things to you when you haven't actually got an answer for how they were done in the first place. This is where there is this big divide, right? They are telling you, they're lying to you about stuff, and then they're planting this seed about conspiracy theorists. The reason I'm not a conspiracy theorist, because if something is true, it's not a conspiracy. I do what I do because I worry about my kids growing up on this corrupt, ridden, lie-laced planet, right? That is why I do what I do. Things that need questioning are the big ones. Telling people how the freaking stones were transported without a logical explanation for how the stones even got there in the first place. It's stupid. These people that come up with these theories of how they were dragged through the desert, of how stop right there. Show us. As many people as you want. Get some copper hand tools and show us how one was dug out of a quarry. And then we'll talk about the rest of it, yeah? God, far out, right? Apollo 11. Apollo 11, Neil, Buzz, Michael, in 1969. Right, the moon. Prove they didn't go to the moon. Here we go. You want us to prove they didn't go to the moon. July, May, 1969. Apollo 10. 10 is a number that comes after 9 and before 11. It was because of some photos that Apollo 10 took of the moon that Neil and Buzz were able to land. Alexa, at what altitude did Apollo 10 take the photos of the moon?
From Seeker.com. On its way, Mariner 10 snapped pictures of the Earth and the Moon from 1.6 million miles away.
No, Alexa, Apollo 10 crew took photographs of the moon which allowed Neil to land. How high were they?
From NationalGeographic.com. Apollo 10 took the lunar module to the moon and descended to within 50,000 feet of the surface.
50,000 feet. So Apollo 10 is separated, apparently, right? and they descended to 50,000 feet. They were traveling, because the orbit speed to orbit the moon is 5,800 kilometers an hour. Now, you get in your average Ford Fiesta and try and get up to it, you'll see that this is very, very, very fast, okay? At an altitude of 50,000 feet. Now let's just work this out. These are the details that we brush under the carpet, right? These are the details that you need to work out before you say to us, prove that they didn't take those photographs. Prove that the photos that the crew of Apollo 10 took didn't help Neil and Buzz land on the moon. What you need to be doing is working this out. In 1969, what kind of a camera would have been able to take pictures of the moon, right, from an altitude higher than what passenger jets are cruising at now, right? They cruise at anywhere between 33, 34, up to 38, 39, 40, depending on turbulence. So, now, how did they take accurate photos of the moon's surface when they were traveling at 5,800 kilometers an hour at an altitude of 50,000 feet above the moon? What kind of photograph do you think you would get when you're cruising in an aeroplane at its normal cruising altitude of, let's say, 35,000 feet, yeah? Right? 35,000 feet. You're traveling at 800 kilometers an hour. All right? Now, for those of you that have flown, clear day, you're looking out the window, you're 35,000 up and you're traveling at 800 kilometers an hour. I want you, the next time that you're up there, to get your camera out and take a photograph of somewhere on land that you're going to then land on 2 months later. See what kind of a picture you get. And then, understanding that you took that picture from 35,000 and they were at 50,000, and you were traveling at 800 kilometers an hour, which is the average speed of a passenger plane, and they were traveling at 5,800 kilometers an hour. So, how did they take photos from that distance and at that speed of the moon that then allowed Neil and Buzz to land on it 2 months later? That is the question that you need to ask them how it was done. And once you get a good logical answer that makes sense, then come back to us conspiracy theorists and we'll say, no, they didn't. And then you have got every single right in the world to say, how do you know they didn't? Prove they didn't. If you get an answer, a logical answer that explains this, and that speed, then you put us on the spot. But until then, don't question, don't ask us to prove stuff that did not happen in the first place. And there is enough evidence, or lack of, to prove that it did not happen in the first place. All right? So stop with the prove that they didn't, because it's ridiculous asking us to prove something that clearly didn't happen. The thing is, they've structured it in such a way that you just don't need any evidence. All you need is for someone to say, yo, this happened. And then we go, what? No, it didn't. And then you go, prove it. This is what I'm trying to protect my kids from. Them at the top talking absolute cat's dribble, right? Making everybody, the youngsters of today, believe everything they say, even though there is no logical evidence or facts or anything that ties in with common sense. to suggest that it was even possible in the first place. So straight away, right, straight away now, everything is connected. Straight away, why would we even talk about Apollo 11 or Apollo 12 or Apollo 13, etc., etc., etc.? Because we still don't have one single logical explanation for how the crew of Apollo 10 took those photos at an altitude of 50,000 feet and travelling at a speed of 5,800 kilometres an hour. That is where we are at. But still, prove that they didn't do it. This is where they've got everybody running around in circles. But just for fun, Neil, Buzz and Michael, where did they train for landing in 1/6 of Earth's gravitational pull? Right? Where did they learn how to fly in a vacuum? Get away, fly. When was it worked out, and what thrust was used to work in a vacuum? So, we say, there's no way they landed on the moon 969, Neil, Buzz and Michael stayed up there orbiting the moon 30 times. Moon, Buzz, Neil, Michael. Never been up to space before, never flown in those conditions. They just travelled for 102 hours and they covered a distance of 386,000 kilometres in a capsule the size of a car. Think they were tired? Do anybody really think that they would have left Michael Collins up there in those conditions after doing everything that they did? Of course you do. Of course you do. We have to prove that they didn't do it. We have to prove that Michael Collins didn't fall asleep. And on and on. What you need to do is find out where they learned how to fly in 1/6 and land in 1/6 of Earth's gravity, where they learned how to fly in a vacuum, and when exactly was this mystery of thrust in a vacuum worked out so that the lads did the job like they did. When you have answers for those, these are the basic questions, there's plenty more. When you have the answers for these, right, and we say, hey, no they didn't, then you'll be able to say, yes they did, prove that they didn't, because this is where they learned how to fly in a 6 of Earth's gravity, this is when they learned how to fly in a vacuum, and this is the thrust that was used in a vacuum. See, when you've got that information, that kind of then gives you a bit of leverage to deal with us conspiracy theorists when we say, no, it didn't happen, all right? Because there is still no answers for these. So if there's no answers for those, why are we getting a hard time for saying it didn't happen? It hardly makes sense, does it? No, it doesn't. Same as pyramids and the Egyptians. It's the same as Kepler and old Roma working that stuff out. Kepler, old Roma, Roma, Newton. Who else? But we could say Copernicus, that doesn't really matter. Einstein, these are the ones, right? These are the ones. Why? Why did they decide to do what they did? Why would somebody between the 1600s, right, decide to do this stuff 350 years before space travel? Why? How had these guys worked all of this stuff out 350 years before even an aeroplane was invented, right? Why? And how? How? How did Kepler work out that this goes on and on and on? Right? It gets really tiring after a while when you say to someone, no, it didn't. They go, prove that they didn't. Oh, seriously? What have they done to people? Right? 1600s, that lot. This is when electricity came out. Alright? Why were these guys, and how were these guys doing all this 200 and something years before even a light bulb was on the market, before there was electricity in any homes, in any buildings, right? Over 200 years. 1616. 1676. This was Roma, right? Speed of light. This was Kepler, right? Electric, 1880s. That's 220 years. No, 260. Before electric was even a thing. And we say, no, it didn't happen. Prove it that it didn't happen. You need to turn back to your teachers and say to them, yo, I'm having a bit of trouble with one of my conspiracy theorists. He's asked me to come back to you and he wants me to find out exactly, you do that. Oh, you do that, the world would be a better place. Prove they didn't do it. Right? Prove they didn't do it. Surely, it would have to start with proof that they did do it, wouldn't it? Otherwise, what is the point of anything if we're at that stage? It's ridiculous. Come on, let's do it. One last one. One last one. Red, Mars. Always Mars. Alright. Sun. Alright, it's all exaggerated with colours. It could be Mercury. Alright. Orange, don't like orange on the blackboard. Don't know why. Alright, Mercury's slinging around, Venus is slinging around. We're all doing our thing. And then 2 years ago, in February 2021, what happens? Clams. Same thing happened in 2007, I think. Come on. You got it, folks. We have us a legend. Something nobody would ever think possible. A chopper. A remote controlled chopper that goes by the name of Ingenuity. Teamed up with what they call a Mars rover, Perseverance. Alexa, when did Curiosity go to Mars?
From Guardian.com, the rover, Curiosity, touched down on Mars on August 6, 2012.
2012. That was a bit early. I thought that was a bit early. 2012. That's right. You can remember. Whoosh, whoosh. So we have us a remote control helicopter that weighs 1.8 kilograms, right? Mars is about 100 and 242 away from the Sun, and at any given time, depending on our orbits. Alexa, how far away is Mars from Earth right now?
Today, Mars will be 381.4 million kilometers from Earth.
So 381. So this means that we've got the Sun in between us, right? So that's a long way, all right? Now, it takes a radio signal anywhere from 6, 7 to, I think, quarter an hour to reach Mars. Right? Ingenuity. No need for that though. Because Ingenuity, it's a self-serve helicopter. Takes off when the weather's good and it lands all on its own, because the crew, that's how they wake up one morning and they go, oh look, she did a flight. Weather must have been good. Here it says that she was going to land and she saw a rock, so she moved over there a bit. This baby, she's got it going on. Ingenuity. One of a kind. One of a kind. How many flights now? 60 or 61? We lose count. 60, maybe 61. Alexa, does it get windy on Mars?
According to an Alexa Answers contributor, yes, it is windy on Mars. Surface winds typically move about 10 to 20 miles per hour. The Viking landers measured speeds of up to 70 miles per hour during dust storms.
70 mile an hour winds, that's 100 k's, give or take. Right? 100 km an hour winds. Now, Alexa, has Ingenuity ever toppled over while it's been on Mars?
Indian Chill from Spotify.
Alexa, stop. Alexa, has Ingenuity, the helicopter, ever toppled over since it's been on Mars?
From Wikipedia.org, Ingenuity, nicknamed Jimmy, is a small autonomous helicopter presently operating on the planet Mars.
Alexa, why doesn't Ingenuity ever fall over while it's on Mars?
From DeccanHerald.com, Ingenuity does get a helping hand from Mars' weak gravity, which is just 1/3 of Earth's.
Now, if anybody thinks from 2021 through 24, that's 12, 24 months plus that, we're looking at 32 months that it is even remotely possible that a helicopter could go through 60 flights, right? Even in this garden, and not topple over once. This is over a period of 2 years and 8 months. The footage. Ingenuity isn't up there. Prove it's not up there. There is a journey to be taken. Understanding that Apollo 10 did not take the photograph of the moon, which enabled Apollo 11 and future missions to get to the moon and land. It stops everything in its tracks. It is said that once one absurdity creeps in, others follow. I know for a fact, right, you cannot take a photograph of the moon's surface from an altitude of 50,000 feet and travelling, why am I even saying this out loud? You want us to prove, right, that they didn't go talk about insane world, right? Seriously. Perseverance and ingenuity landing. Right? There is footage of them landing in February 2021, and the footage will show you that it was not real, okay? The footage is so ridiculously bad, it shows you that it is not real. Number one, when it first opens up, there is footage, let's do the shoots, of the parachutes, right? Footage. The view that you get is as if you are looking up at the chute, right? And there's an arm. So we're looking up, Mars is behind us, we're falling down. You're looking up at the chute. So pattern, right? There's these patterns inside the chute. And then another view comes up and it says something like a slow motion view or something, right? They're supposed to be the exact same view. Now, straight away, the patterns on the parachute are totally different. So what they're saying is, look, this is a view of the chute. Oh, yeah. And here we've got one in delayed or slow time. Hang on. They're two different chutes. They're two different chutes. That means that it's not the same chute, which means the footage is not real. It could be real footage, but it's definitely not the same footage. Then, still with this, there's an arm, right? It's like holding the chute. And then there's another arm on the other one. Mamma mia! The arms are different, okay? So, you want us to prove to you that they didn't go, but you don't care that the images that they show you of the parachute are different, and that the two supporting arms that are holding the parachute are different. That's okay. Let's continue, right? You want us to prove that they didn't go, but you've let this slide through the net. Okay. Next. In one box, we're looking up at the beast, because this thing can only be classed as a beast. Alright? It's supporting ingenuity, weighs 1.8, and perseverance is well over a ton. Alexa, how much does Perseverance, the Mars rover, weigh?
From interregcentral.eu, the unmanned Mars rover Perseverance weighs 1,000 kilograms and is part of NASA's Mars exploration program.
A ton. Right? Just Perseverance. Right? Weighs a ton. We're looking up at the chute and the beast coming down, right? On this side, so the camera, this is Perseverance tracks, right? This is looking from Perseverance up towards the parachute. This one is looking from the parachute and the beast, right, supporting them, down, right? So, and we're looking down towards Perseverance, and Ingenuity was tucked up somewhere. In this image, there are 3 supporting cables between this monster and Perseverance and Ingenuity. In the one where we're looking up at the monster, the troop carrier, the 3 cables going into a center point, right? Check the footage out. It is visibly angled cables, right? Going to a center point somewhere on this massive troop carrier. In the other image, from the troop carrier, right, down to Perseverance, you see the cables, and they are 100% parallel. So as this thing's landing, these cables, you see all shaking, they're all angled in. And on this one, when you're looking down to Perseverance, the cables are bang on parallel. More proof, 100% proof, that the images that we're being shown are not the same images. But you still want us to prove to you that they're not up there. Isn't that amazing, right? It's like this detachment from reality. You don't care what evidence there is that proves that all of this is rubbish, right? You don't care about the evidence that's there. You want extra on top, like extra evidence. There is also an umbilical cord, right? An umbilical cord that runs down from the troop carrier, and I can't remember which one is which. I can't remember if it was the one where we were looking down from the Beast down to Ingenuity and Perseverance, or if it was the one where we were looking up from Perseverance. Either way, there is footage of an umbilical cord, and it is shaking around like crazy, right? It's all over there's one that isn't shaky, and then there's one, right, that is all over the place, right? And they're showing these things at roughly the same time as it's happening. Yeah, this is the view from here, and this is the view from there, and you're looking at one cable that's going absolutely mental, but the other cable's fairly well behaved. It's illogical. It is proof, 100% proof, that the images that they're showing us, it's not of the same thing, right? But you still want us to prove to you that they didn't go. 60 flights, a helicopter, up. Alexa, is carbon dioxide corrosive?
From console.com. Carbon dioxide in aqueous solution is highly corrosive and can cause significant damage to steel designs.
Alexa, what kind of atmosphere does Mars have?
According to an Alexa Answers contributor, Mars has a thin atmosphere made up mostly of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and argon gases.
A thin atmosphere made up mostly of 90%, 95% carbon dioxide. Alexa, how dense is the atmosphere on Mars when compared to Earth?
From illavandia.com. The atmosphere of Mars is about 100 times less dense than the atmosphere of Earth.
Nearly. So 100, right? 1%. It's nearly a vacuum. Ingenuity. They reckon they've got big propellers on her and that they go extra fast, right? The whole thing of absurdities, right? My main one is all about the latest one is the speed of light. The diameter of the sun is 1,390,000 kilometers. The speed of light is 299,792 kilometers per second. If we divide the diameter by 299,792, we get a number, and that number is 4.6. Alexa, what's 1,390,000 divided by 299,792?
1,390,000 divided by 299,792 is approximately 4.6365.
Speed of light. Therefore, it takes 4 seconds for the sun to radiate light the distance of its diameter. It takes 4.6 seconds for the sun to radiate light the distance of its own diameter. If this were the sun, and we were looking at it from this distance, we looked at it and, you know, what they're saying. And start stopwatches now. That is how fast the sun is radiating the light. That is what they're telling us. It's the most illogical thing, and we would never ever have known about that speed and the time it takes if they hadn't come up with this Mickey Mouse number. And it's the reason that we know that it takes 4.6 seconds for the light to radiate from the sun. Now, it's only a bulb. It's only a bulb. We could bring that down in ratio, right? Which I had over on the fence, and it is exactly the same. Light is absolute. It's common sense. This defies common sense. But if people are overlooking the fact that you couldn't have taken a photograph from 50,000 feet at a speed of 5,800 kilometers an hour back in 1969, it didn't help the Apollo 11 land on the moon because it didn't happen. And then there is continuation of absurdities. Once you let one fucking absurdity slip in, the floodgates are open. And that's where we're at. So from now on, when a conspiracy theorist says that didn't happen, instead of going, prove it didn't happen, right? Prove it. Why don't you go back to the people who were lying to you about all of this stuff and say, excuse me, I'm having an issue with a conspiracy theorist. He's recommended that I come back and say, or ask, how did whatever it is we're talking about, how did this happen, right? And why? Back in the 1600s. Ask them. Say, listen, got a bit of an issue with a conspiracy theorist. He wants me to ask you, why did Kepler decide to one day, 300 and something years, close to 400 years before space travel was even thought of, why did he work out the gravitational things and planets and, you know, considering that the asteroid that was 10 million kilometers away, right? The dart was shot off to this asteroid 10 million kilometers away, knocked it off course. Do you know why? Because of what Kepler worked out. His equations worked out where that asteroid will be in next 20 years. That's why we know everything. Oh, Kepi, isn't it? It's Kepi. Kepi. In fact, it took next to no time at all. Did it not knock the asteroid off by 3% of its course? Like, it was going this way, but the rocket knocked it off course slightly. How about that? Mamma mia. People are lapping it up. Alexa, how far off course did DART knock the asteroid? I've forgotten the name of the asteroid.
This might answer your question. The Karen is 5.208 billion kilometres away from Earth.
No, it didn't. One absurdity after another. My job is to protect my children. They're lying. They're lying about everything. It's illogical, it defies common sense, and it defies logic. So much of it. So stop with the prove that they didn't and get your people to prove that they did first, alright? Stop with the constant knocking the ball back in our court. Ask them how, and in a lot of cases, ask them why.